the Xal'vari and the Deathworlders' pride. The planet Drexus V was a world of unrelenting brutality. Towering mountain ranges concealed predatory beasts the size of warships, molten rivers carved through the obsidian wastelands, and storms of razor-sharp ice swept across the tundras. Only the strongest survived, and the Xal'vari were the strongest of them all. For centuries, the Xal'vari had roamed the stars, unchallenged as the galaxy's apex predators. The Galactic Council, a loose coalition of weaker species, dared not stand in their way. Every time the Xal'vari conquered a world, they reinforced their belief. They were the only true Deathworlders, beings forged by the deadliest environment in existence. General Vorik stood at the bridge of his warship, the Eternal Dominance, gazing at the holographic display before him. It showed the latest scans of a newly discovered species, humans, a race of pink-skinned bipeds from a backwater planet called Earth. The Galactic Council had welcomed these creatures into their ranks, a sign of their endless weakness. The Xal'vari did not respect diplomacy. They respected only strength. If the humans were under the Council's protection, then they were no better than the frail, prey-like species the Xal'vari had crushed before. Have they demonstrated any exceptional traits? Vorik rumbled, his voice like grinding stone. His second-in-command, Commander Zaltun, studied the reports. No extraordinary physical attributes. Their homeworld, Earth, has a fluctuating climate, but it does not compare to Drexus V. They are smaller than us, weaker. The only thing of note is their adaptability. They exist in many environments. Vorik scoffed. Adaptability is a trait of prey. Strength is the mark of a Deathworlder. He turned his gaze toward a smaller holographic projection, one of Juno 7, a human colony world on the outskirts of the Council's territory. This will be the test, Vorik declared. We will take Juno 7 by force. As an example to the humans and the Council, we will show them what it means to stand before true Deathworlders. His subordinates clicked their mandibles in agreement, a Xal'vari gesture of approval. The invasion fleet was assembled in less than a day. Warships darkened the skies of Drexus V as they launched into the void, heading straight for Juno 7. Juno 7, the humans' first stand. The colony of Juno 7 was a relatively new settlement, a lush world of thick forests, sprawling rivers, and jagged mountain ranges. Humans had tamed parts of it, building cities and military outposts, but much of it remained wild. When the Xal'vari fleet emerged from hyperspace, the alarm sirens blared through the colony. Military officers scrambled to defensive positions as civilians were evacuated to underground bunkers. Colonel Hayes, the leader of Juno 7's defense forces, stood in the command center, watching the Xal'vari ships approach. He had read reports about these aliens, their arrogance, their brutality, the belief that they were the deadliest beings in the galaxy. That was their first mistake. Status report, Hayes called. Lieutenant Patel turned from her console. They're deploying ground forces. Heavy infantry, mechanized walkers, and aerial gunships. They are not wasting time. Hayes nodded. Good. Neither are we. Activate the wildfire protocol. Patel hesitated for half a second, then grinned. Yes, sir. Across Juno 7, the forests surrounding the colony came to life. Hidden trenches filled with napalm ignited, creating walls of flame that severed Xal'vari landing zones. Automated turrets sprang from underground bunkers, raining gunfire upon the invaders. The Xal'vari, expecting a weak resistance, were met instead with coordinated hellfire. The battle begins. As the Xal'vari troops stormed the colony's outskirts, they were met with something they had never encountered before: organized human ambushes. A Xal'vari warrior, Brachys, snarled as his platoon advanced through the charred forest. The smoke burned his lungs, and the human terrain was unpredictable, uneven, littered with fallen trees, filled with strange noises that made even a Xal'vari hesitate. Then the first shot rang out. Brachys' second-in-command, a veteran of a dozen campaigns, collapsed with a hole in his skull. There had been no warning, no scent, no sound. Then another shot, and another. Snipers. Brachys roared in frustration and ordered a charge. But the moment his warriors advanced, hidden explosives detonated beneath their feet. Humans were not fighting like prey. They were hunting. Vorok's realization. Back aboard the Eternal Dominance, General Vorok watched the battle unfold with growing unease. Something was wrong. The humans weren't fighting like the weaklings the Council usually produced. They weren't breaking. They weren't surrendering. They were bleeding the Xal'vari dry. His forces had landed expecting an easy victory, but now reports showed heavy casualties, supply lines cut off, and human resistance increasing. For the first time in his life, Vorok felt something unfamiliar. Not fear? No, a Xal'vari never feared, but something close. Doubt. These humans, he muttered, narrowing his eyes. They are not as weak as we thought. Shall we order a retreat? Zaltan asked hesitantly. Vorok growled. No, that would be admitting weakness. He clenched his fists. We will crush them, no matter the cost. Yet, as he watched more Xal'vari squads disappear into the shadows of Juno 7's forest, never to be heard from again, a terrible thought gnawed at him. What if humans were the real Deathworlders? The jungle hunts back. The Xal'vari's arrogance. General Vorok clenched his mandibles as another transmission cut to static. His elite forces were being systematically wiped out, and he had no clear understanding of how. The Xal'vari had fought across the galaxy, conquering weaker species with ease. Their brute force had always been enough, until now. Status, he barked. Commander Zaltan shifted uneasily. Our landing zones are compromised. The humans have used fire, explosives, and hidden marksmen to decimate our initial wave. He hesitated before adding, they are fighting like predators. Vorok's claws curled against the command console. That was impossible. The Xal'vari were the predators. Humans were supposed to be weak, prey. And yet, their forces were bleeding out in the forests of Juno 7. Deploy reinforcement squads, he ordered. Full armor, heavy walkers, suppressive bombardments. Crush these humans under sheer force. The command was given, and hundreds of Xal'vari war machines descended from the sky. This battle would be over soon, or so they thought. Into the kill zone, the Xal'vari drop ships tore through the smoke-filled sky, deploying fresh squads of warriors and heavy walkers. Massive bipedal machines, armed with plasma cannons that could vaporize entire buildings. The invaders pushed forward, their thick armor plating deflecting standard human gunfire. They advanced through the charred remains of the jungle, intent on exterminating every last human. Then the jungle fought back. Colonel Hayes watched through binoculars as the Xal'vari entered the trap. From his concealed vantage point, he could see their bulky forms moving through the trees, oblivious to what lay ahead. He smiled. Light them up. In an instant, the silent jungle erupted into chaos. Massive logs, sharpened to spears, swung down from camouflaged ropes, impaling Xal'vari warriors in an instant. Explosive charges, buried beneath layers of leaves and dirt, sent enemy forces hurtling through the air. Above, concealed human marksmen took their shots, punching through the weak points in the Xal'vari armor. The neck, the joints, the unprotected mandibles. The Xal'vari war machines, seemingly indestructible, suddenly found themselves stuck in the thick mud of the jungle. As they struggled, human anti-tank teams moved swiftly, planting explosive charges and disappearing into the trees before the walkers even realized they were being targeted. Then, detonation. A column of fire erupted as one of the Xal'vari's prized war machines toppled like a dying beast, its mechanical frame burning. The Xal'vari thought they were leading the hunt. Instead, they were being hunted. The Xal'vari start to break. Brachys, a seasoned Xal'vari warrior, wiped thick green blood from his wounded arm. His unit had been reduced to half strength within minutes of entering the jungle. His species had fought dozens of wars, but never like this. There were no battle formations, no open duels of strength, just invisible enemies striking from the shadows, then vanishing into the trees. This was not war. This was a massacre. A sudden rustling made him spin, raising his plasma rifle. Too late. A figure dropped from the tree canopy above, knife flashing in the dim light. Brachys tried to react, but the human was too fast. The blade found its mark, slicing across his throat with surgical precision. As Brachys fell to his knees, choking on his own blood, he looked up at his killer, a human soldier, dressed in a ghillie suit, almost indistinguishable from the jungle around him. Cold, unflinching eyes stared down at him before the human simply vanished back into the trees. The last thing Brachys thought before the darkness took him was, "These creatures are Deathworlders too." Vorok's fury. Back on the Eternal Dominance, General Vorok's rage was boiling over. Another battalion lost. Another transmission cut to static. His forces, his elite warriors, were being slaughtered. This was impossible. This was not how Deathworlders were supposed to die. Slamming his clawed fist onto the console, Vorok snarled in frustration. These humans, they should be breaking. They should be begging for mercy. Xal'vari, his second-in-command, swallowed hard. He had never seen the general this furious or this uncertain. "My lord." Xal'vari hesitated before continuing. "We have never faced an enemy like this. Perhaps we should reconsider our strategy." Vorok turned sharply, his eyes glowing with anger. "Are you suggesting we retreat?" Xal'vari hesitated. "No, my lord. I am suggesting we stop underestimating them." The general bared his fangs. His pride screamed at him to ignore the warning. But deep inside, he knew the truth. These humans were different. They weren't prey. They weren't even rivals. They were predators just like the Xal'vari. And if he did not change tactics soon, this war would not be a conquest. It would be his people's extinction. The jungle devours its invaders. Desperation in the ranks. The Xal'vari invasion force was unraveling. What had been expected to be a swift and brutal conquest had turned into a nightmare of attrition and terror. General Vorok stared at the holographic map in the command center, his mandibles twitching. Red indicators, signifying Xal'vari forces, were vanishing at an alarming rate. "How are we losing to these primitives?" he growled. Commander Xal'vari hesitated before responding. "The humans, they are not fighting conventionally, my lord. They are..." He struggled to find the right words, mandibles clicking nervously. Vorok's full eyes narrowed. "They are what?" Xal'vari exhaled, then said, "They are hunting us." Vorok's claws curled against the console. It was an insult to everything he believed. The Xal'vari were supposed to be the hunters, the apex predators of the galaxy. They had conquered weaker species with ease. But these humans weren't weak. They were ghosts in the trees, phantoms that struck without warning and vanished before retaliation could be mounted. They were becoming the jungle itself. "We have no choice," Xal'vari admitted. "If we continue like this, we will be wiped out." Vorok growled, but he knew the truth. His warriors were breaking. Reports of Xal'vari squads deserting their posts, disobeying orders, or even turning their weapons on themselves rather than face what lurked in the trees were coming in every hour. This war was no longer about conquest. It was about survival. The human counteroffensive begins. Deep in the jungle, Colonel Hayes crouched beside his team, watching the enemy through infrared binoculars. The Xal'vari were lost, disorganized, and terrified. Just how we want them. Hayes activated his comms. "Team Bravo, proceed with Ghost Protocol." Across the jungle, hidden human teams sprang into action. Snipers lined up their shots, targeting officers first. One by one, the Xal'vari command structure collapsed, leaving their troops in even greater disarray. At the same time, engineers deployed sonic disruptors designed to mimic the cries of predatory animals, sending waves of panic through the alien ranks. Then, the ambush began in full force. Flamethrowers roared to life, turning thick jungle undergrowth into walls of fire, forcing the Xal'vari warriors into choke points where human soldiers were waiting. Explosives rigged in the canopy sent massive trees crashing down, crushing enemy forces and trapping entire battalions. Drones swooped from above, deploying miniature explosive payloads into the Xal'vari supply caches, leaving them with no food, no weapons, and no reinforcements. Within minutes, what remained of the Xal'vari invasion force was thrown into complete chaos. The jungle takes its toll. Brachys, one of the few surviving Xal'vari officers, moved carefully through the dense foliage, his weapon clutched tightly in his claws. His entire squad was gone, killed, captured, or dragged into the darkness by things he never even saw. He heard a rustling behind him and spun, heart pounding. Nothing. Then, a whisper. Brackies. His blood froze. No human could know his name. No human should know his name. And yet, the voice, eerily calm, almost amused, had spoken it. He turned, wildly firing his plasma rifle. The shots lit up the trees, but there was nothing there. Another whisper. This time, closer. Run. Brackies did. Vorok's last stand. On the Eternal Dominance, Vorok was facing the worst moment of his career. Zal'tan, his most trusted officer, was dead, found strangled in his command tent, with no signs of a struggle. The humans had infiltrated even their forward bases. The reports were clear. His invasion force was no longer an army. It was prey. There was only one option left. Vorok activated the ship's long-range communication system. All Xal'vari forces, retreat. The words burned in his throat like acid. A Xal'vari general did not retreat. But against these humans, there was no choice. As the surviving Xal'vari soldiers scrambled for extraction points, Vorok's thoughts were grim. They had mocked Earth's wilderness, and now it had devoured them whole. The humbling of the Xal'vari, fleeing the jungle of death. The once proud Xal'vari invasion force had been reduced to a disorganized, terrified swarm of fleeing warriors. Their commanders were dead, their supply lines cut, and their soldiers were scattered in a hostile jungle that seemed to consume them whole. General Vorok had given the order to retreat, but even that had become a nightmare. The jungle itself was working against them, and the humans weren't letting them leave without a final lesson. From the shadows of the canopy, snipers took their shots, felling officers and squad leaders first. From the thick underbrush, special forces squads emerged, cutting down the stragglers. And from the skies, human drones followed them like vultures, dropping small but deadly explosives that tore apart retreating units. Vorok watched in horror from the bridge of the Eternal Dominance, his claws gripping the edges of his command console so tightly they cracked. The might of the Xal'vari Empire had been broken, not in a grand battle, but piece by piece, in the depths of an alien wilderness, by a species they had underestimated. The last trap. As the surviving Xal'vari forces scrambled to evacuation zones, they had no idea they were walking into the final human trap. Colonel Hayes watched their movements from the top of a dense jungle ridge, his helmet HUD marking enemy troop positions in real time. He activated his comms. Phase 3, execute. All at once, the jungle lit up with human artillery fire. Mortar rounds screamed through the sky, hitting enemy landing zones, sending entire Xal'vari drop ships tumbling and burning before they could lift off. Explosive traps rig along their retreat paths detonated, burying entire squads beneath falling trees and landslides. EMP charges disabled enemy energy shields, leaving the fleeing warriors exposed as human gunships swooped down, unleashing a final, merciless barrage of gunfire. The jungle had been their graveyard, and now it was closing in for the final burial. Vorok's breaking point. On the Eternal Dominance, Vorok had seen enough. His fleet was in shambles, his ground forces annihilated, and his legacy as a general ruined. The worst part, the humans had done all of this with fewer numbers. They had never needed the same overwhelming forces as the Xal'vari. They had used strategy, patience, and the environment itself to dismantle an army that should have crushed them. Vorok's claws trembled with fury. Launch a planetary bombardment, he ordered. The Eternal Dominance still had one last weapon, the ability to reduce the jungle to ash from orbit. If the humans wanted to fight like monsters in the dark, he would burn their entire battlefield to the ground. But before his weapons officers could fire, an alert blared across the bridge. Incoming human fleet detected. Vorok's eyes widened. On the holographic display, dozens of human warships dropped from FTL, and at their head was the UNSC Warhammer, a dreadnought-class battleship twice the size of the Eternal Dominance. A transmission came through. The voice was calm, cold. General Vorok, this is Admiral Reynolds of the United Nations Space Command. Stand down. or we will personally escort your ships into the nearest star. Vorik's mandibles tightened. He had already lost the war, but now he realized something even worse. He had lost to a species that had barely begun to fight. With shaking claws, he gave the order, "All forces, surrender." Aftermath: the humbling of an empire. Days later, the few surviving Xal'vari soldiers were rounded up and placed in prisoner transports, their once mighty invasion force now nothing more than scattered refugees. As Vorik was led through the jungle, he caught sight of Colonel Hayes standing atop a hill, arms crossed, watching as the last of the Xal'vari were taken away. The human met his gaze, and he smiled, not a smile of cruelty, but one of knowing. The Xal'vari had learned their lesson, and the galaxy would never underestimate Earth again.